Welcome back to 16.2 and 16.1. We talked a little bit about how to shift graphs, and if a number was on the inside and it was plus, we would do the opposite and move it to the left, however much we were adding. If it was negative, we'd move it to the right, however much we were subtracting. And then on the outside of the parentheses, if it's a plus 5, we would go up 5. If it were minus 5, we'd go down 5. So we talked about moving graphs left, right, up, and down. Now we're going to talk about vertical stretches and compressions. So this word stretch just means that you're going to make it bigger. Which makes sense. If you stretch right before you wake up, you're expanding yourself. You're stretching your arms up as high as they'll go. You're stretching your legs out as far as they'll go. You're making yourself bigger. You're making the graph bigger. Now, compression, or to compress a graph, you're going to shrink it. Or make it smaller. If I were to curl up in a little ball, I'm compressing myself. I'm shrinking. I'm getting smaller. So if we look at this equation that they gave us, we already know about the inside here. We already know that this inside the parentheses either moves left, if there's a plus sign there, or moves right, if there's a subtraction sign there. And again, we talked about that in 16.1. And we also talked about in 16.1 was this, plus D. So it either moves the graph up if there's a plus sign, or moves the graph down if there's a negative sign. So we already know about those two things. We worked practice problems on those. The new thing we're talking about today is this A. So that wasn't there before. We're multiplying A times this whole thing. So here's what happens. If A is greater than 1, A is greater than 1, you're going to stretch vertically. So you're growing. If A is greater than 1, you're stretching vertically, you're growing. Now, if A is between 0 and 1, so it's either a fraction or a decimal, between 0 and 1, you're compressing vertically, which makes sense. If I multiply anything by something greater than 1, if I multiply 2 by 2, I get 4. If I multiply 2 by 6, I get 12. It's getting bigger. If I multiply by something greater than 1, it's getting bigger. Well, if I multiply 4 by 1/2, well, I'm really taking 1/2 of 4. I'm getting 2. It's getting smaller. So it does make sense. One other important thing to remember is looking at your A. If A has a negative, if A is negative, you're multiplying by a negative, the graph, reflects, so it's flipping over the x-axis. So just look out. If there's a negative right here in front of that A, it's going to flip the graph over the x-axis. So that's one other thing. So we already talked about these two. We know this. We know this. This is the only new thing. Stretch vertically. If we multiply by something greater than 1. If we multiply by something less than 1, we're compressing vertically. And if we multiply by a negative, if A is negative, we flip over the x-axis. That's it. And again, it's right here. I guess I could have written it right here. If the graph, if A is negative, the graph reflects over x-axis. It's nice they put a line there. Wish I would have saw that earlier. Might be. Okay, so let's look at some practice problems. So let's start with our new thing. Here's our A. We're multiplying by 3. So it's greater than 1. So it's going to be a vertical stretch of 3. Then we look at inside the parentheses. It's -1, so I do the opposite. I'm going to the right 1. And lastly, I look on the outside of the parentheses. I'm adding 3, so I'm going up 3. And there's no negative, so there's no reflection. So the red's the only thing that's new. Let's try example number 2. This time I'm multiplying by 1/2. If I multiply by something by 1/2, it's getting smaller. I'm taking half of it. So this is a vertical compression of 1/2. Vertical compression of 1/2. And again, the half is positive, so there's no flipping over the x-axis. If I look at what's inside my parentheses by x, -4, I'm shifting to the right 4. Shifting to the right 4. And then lastly, if I look at this -8 here, that means I'm shifting down 8. Let's try this one. So looking at this 2, I know I'm looking at a parabola. The other ones were linear. But anyway, I've got -0.6 is my A. So first off, what's sticking out to me is this negative. That's important. So this negative tells me I'm going to reflect my graph over the x-axis. The 0.6 tells me that it is between 0 and 1. So if I multiply something by 0.6, the number is actually going to get smaller. So it's a vertical compression of 0.6. If I look on the inside, I've got +2. So I really do the opposite. So I'm shifting left 2. And then +5 tells me to move up or down. So I'm shifting up 5. So there are 4 things that happened. I flipped it over the x-axis. There was a vertical compression. I was shrinking it by a factor of 0.6. Shift left 2, and then shift up 5. Let's look at 4. Ooh, this is kind of what I was talking about in 16:1. Let's have a look at it. Again, it tells me there's a 2, little baby 2 here, so I know it's a parabola. Let's look at our A. So I'm multiplying by 9. It's +9. There's no negative, so it tells me I'm not flipping. So I know that there is a vertical, and this time it's a stretch because it's greater than 1. If I multiply with something by 9, it's going to get way bigger. Vertical stretch of 9. And then if you notice, there's no parentheses. There's nothing in the parentheses. So, I mean, this is really saying f of x equals 9 times x plus 0. There's nothing there. Squared plus 3. There's nothing happening. So it's not moving to the left or to the right. So if there's nothing inside the parentheses, you're not moving to the left or right. But I am moving up 3. Shifting up 3. Okay. 5. So there is just a negative here. So technically, it's a -1. Now, the negative tells me that I'm reflecting over the x-axis. What happens if I multiply by 1? 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 500 is 500. Literally nothing happens to the number if I multiply by 1. If you look at our rule, it has to be, if I can find it, has to be greater than 1. It's not greater than or equal to, it's greater than 1. And same thing here, it's got to be less than 1, not less than or equal to 1. So if it's equal to 1, nothing's happening. It's not getting bigger or smaller. If I multiply something by 1, it's staying the same. There's not a vertical stretch or a vertical compression there. So all that happened is it flipped. Well, then I'm adding 1 inside the parentheses, so I'm shifting left 1. And then I'm subtracting 4 on the outside. So I'm shifting to down 4. Okay, last one. A is negative 7. Negative tells me reflect over x-axis. The 7 is greater than 1. So I know there's a vertical stretch of 7 inside my parentheses. I've got minus 5, so I do the opposite. I'm going to the left. Oops, that's not the opposite. Going to the right, 5. There we go. Just making sure y'all were paying attention. And then I'm not adding or subtracting anything. I'm adding 0, so nothing's happening. It's not going up or down. There's nothing there. So that's all that happened. It reflected over the x-axis, a vertical stretch of 7, and shifted to the right 5. That's it. That's all that's new. All you learned today was if there's a negative, if I multiply by a negative, it flips over the x-axis. If I multiply by something that's greater than 1, then it's going to be a vertical stretch by however much I'm multiplying by. If it's less than 1, a fraction or a decimal, then I am vertically compressing by that fraction or a decimal. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Sorry it's a little over 10 minutes today, but still less than 30. You're welcome. Let me know if you have any questions. Come see me on Zoom. Bye, y'all. Good luck.